11 people have been executed in 2021. This is the lowest number of executions since 1988. Let's see what crimes they committed, what were their last words and last meals. Lisa Montgomery, executed on January 13th after 16 years on death row. She was the only female prisoner that received the lethal injection in 2021. She was charged with murdering Bobby Jo Stinnett, who was pregnant, and she also kidnapped her unborn baby. Stinnett was discovered by her mother, Becky Harper, about an hour after the assault. Harper immediately called 911. Attempts by paramedics to revive Stinnett were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at St. Francis Hospital in Maryville, Missouri. Montgomery had a history of lying, and at that moment, her husband thought she was expecting a baby. She tried to pass the infant as her own, but one day after the murder, she was arrested by the police. Fortunately, the baby survived and was returned to the family. Montgomery was accused of a federal crime. Hence, her execution was in fact under the federal government in Indiana Terre Haute Complex, not the state of Missouri where the crime happened. According to Time, Montgomery tapped her fingers nervously before closing her eyes to pass away while gazing bewildered at the journalists observing from behind a glass pane. As the lethal injection started at about 1:18 in the morning, Montgomery continued to lick her lips and moaned momentarily as the pentobarbital entered her body through IVs in both arms. A short while later, her stomach ached briefly before stopping abruptly. She declined to offer any final words when asked whether she had any. There are no reports about what she chose to have as her final meal. Corey Johnson, executed on January 14th after 29 years on death row. After being found guilty of killing 7 people in Virginia in 1992 as part of a narcotics trade, he received a death sentence. When 11 people were slain in gang violence in Richmond during a 45-day period, Johnson was thought to be responsible. According to a federal legislation that targets large-scale drug dealers, he and 2 other members of the Newtown gang received death sentences. In his closing remarks, Johnson expressed regret for his wrongdoing and expressed his wish for the families of the victims to find peace. He also expressed gratitude to the jail staff, the chaplain, his minister, and his legal counsel. "I would have said I was sorry before, but I didn't know how. I hope you will find peace. To my family, I have always loved you, and your love has made me real. On the streets, I was looking for shortcuts. I had some good role models. I was sidetracking. I was blind and stupid. I am not the same man that I was." Peyton Johnson, Lewis Johnson, Bobby Long, Dorothy Armstrong, Anthony Carter, Linwood Giles, and Curtis Thorne. Johnson said each name of his victims in his final statement. "I want these names to be remembered." Johnson's defense team claimed that he had an IQ of 69, which was lower than the benchmark the Supreme Court provided for states to use in determining whether an execution would be considered cruel and unusual punishment under the Constitution.
It's incomprehensible to me that Corey could have been the leader of any sort of organized or even disorganized drug group. Anybody with that level of intellectual disability that everyone was well aware of. Nobody would have followed him. Nobody would have taken his directions. Corey was a follower, not a leader.
3 years after leaving Elmhurst Group Home, Corey was arrested and charged with 7 murders. Despite Corey's intellectual disability, he was given 7 separate death sentences for his role in the murders.
It is unconstitutional to execute someone who has intellectual disability. People with intellectual disability do not have the moral culpability necessary in order to merit the most extreme punishment under our law.
Prosecutors originally sought the death penalty against one of Corey's co-defendants, Vernon Lance Thomas, who was charged with committing 4 murders. But when his lawyers presented evidence that Thomas was intellectually disabled, the government dropped its request for the death penalty. Thomas was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The evidence of Corey's disability is more comprehensive than that of Thomas and shows that Corey's disability is more severe.
You almost felt somewhat sorry for him because you could see that he was challenged.
I'm 45 years old. The last time I seen my brother, hugged and kissed him, I was 18 years old.
Johnson looked confused and disoriented when asked if he had any final remarks, concentrating on a room on his left for members of his family. He still gave a sidelong glance and answered, "No, I'm okay." He continued to stare intensely at the same room for a few seconds before shortly saying, "Love you." His final meal consisted in pizza and strawberry shake. He said he didn't also get the jelly-filled donuts that he ordered. Dustin John Higgs, executed on January 16th after 25 years on death row. In 2000, he was found guilty and given the death penalty for his part in the Maryland murders of 3 women in January 1996. On the Patuxent Research Refugee in Prince George's County, Maryland, Tamika Black, Tanji Jackson, and Michonne Chin were all shot and killed. Higgs was tried by the federal government rather than the state of Maryland because this is considered federal land. The key defense argument was that Higgs waited in a parked car rather than killing any of the 3 victims directly. Willis Mark Haynes, the shooter, was given a life in prison sentence plus 45 years. Although Higgs did not murder anyone, the prosecution contended that he was the ringleader who directed and bullied Haynes into committing the killings. At the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, Higgs, 48 years old, was put to death by pentobarbital injection at 1:23 in the morning on January 16, 2021. His final words were, "I'd like to say I am an innocent man. I did not order the murders." Then he mentioned each of the 3 murder victims by name. Higgs reportedly waved his fingers and murmured, "I love you," while looking toward a chamber set aside for his family and attorneys as the injection was being given to him. His eyelids remained half open, his pupils became visible, and his level of stillness increased. There are no reports of his last meal. Quinton Philippe Jones, executed on May 19th after 21 years on death row in the state of Texas. Jones killed his great-aunt Bertina Bryant, age 83, on September 11, 1999, by beating her to death with a baseball bat. He then stole her money and used it to buy some cocaine. At the time of the murder, he was using cocaine and heroin. Jones also acknowledged taking part in the slayings of Mark Sanders, 19 years old, and Clark Peoples, 27 years old, in June of 1999. Nonetheless, he gave Ricky Rusa, another individual, the most of the blame for those killings. The prosecution brought up the murders in their justifications for the death penalty. Rusa received a life sentence after being found guilty on both charges of capital murder. On September 21, 2039, he will be eligible for parole. Jones' final statement was, "I would like to thank all of the supporting people who helped me over the years. To Mad Maddie, my twin Sonia, Angie, and all of the homies, AK Money and Peruvian Queen, including Crazy Dominican. I was so glad to leave this world a better, more positive place. It's not an easy life with all the negativities. Love all my friends and all the friendships that I have made. They are like the sky. It is all part of life, like a big full plate of food for the soul. I hope I left everyone a plate of food full of happy memories, happiness, and no sadness. I'm done, Warden." No final meal granted since he was on Texas death row. John William Hummel, executed on June 30th after 11 years on death row in the state of Texas. A Tarrant County jury convicted Hummel of murdering his pregnant wife, his 5-year-old daughter, and his father-in-law at their Kennedale home in 2011. Hummel was given the death penalty by the jury. After responding to a fire in the early morning, police discovered their charred, beaten bodies in or close to their beds, according to court documents. Before the fire was started, officials established that they had died from blunt force trauma. Hummel killed his father-in-law, Clyde Bedford, 57 years old, a wheelchair user, and his daughter, Jody Hummel, with a baseball bat after stabbing his wife, Joy Hummel, more than 30 times. Hummel claimed he was not at home during the crime and was instead at a store during his initial police interview. Records state that when he was eventually captured at the California-Mexico border, he admitted to first stabbing and beating his wife, then beating the other 2 victims and torching his home. His and the victim's DNA matched weapons later discovered in a dumpster, according to the investigators. His final statement was, "I truly regret killing my family. I am thankful for all the thoughts and prayers for my family over the last few days. I love each and every one of you." He did not get a special last meal. Rick Allen Rhodes, executed on September 28 after 30 years on death row in the state of Texas. A day after being released on parole from a 5-year term for car theft and house invasion, Rhodes was found guilty of the murders of brothers Charles and Bradley Allen in September 1991, according to prison records. Rhodes admitted to the killings when he was detained weeks later on suspicion of breaking into a school, according to court documents. He told investigators he rode a bus to Houston after being released from jail in 1991 and started drinking while strolling around his former neighborhood until early in the morning. Charles Allen and Rhodes eventually got into a fight outside the Allen's Pasadena home. Rhodes then followed Allen inside because he believed Allen was getting a gun. Rhodes struck Allen with a metal bar and stabbed him with a knife that Allen had seized during the assault. Rhodes stabbed the brother as Bradley Allen emerged from the house and started to strike him. When Rhodes left the house, according to the prosecution, he stole cash and clean clothing. Rhodes informed the police that he learned of the brothers' passing via the news later in the day. He claimed he was tired of running and upset by the deaths. As seated on a jail gurney, Rhodes decided against making a final statement. After receiving a deadly injection of pentobarbital, he was pronounced dead at 6:29 p.m. No final meal granted. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. Thank you. Ernest Lee Johnson, executed on October 5th after 28 years on death row in the state of Missouri. On February 12, 1994, Johnson shot and killed Mary Bratcher, age 46, Mabel Scruggs, age 57, and Fred Jones while attempting to rob a nearby Cassie's in Columbia, Missouri. Johnson borrowed a .25 caliber revolver with the purpose of robbing the business while under the influence of cocaine. During the attempted heist, Johnson lost his temper with his victims when Bratcher made an attempt to sabotage a key to the Cassie's safe. He used the borrowed gun to shoot them, then used the claw hammer to beat them to death. A screwdriver was also used to stab Bratcher in the head. After storing the victims in the store's restroom and refrigerator, Johnson fled the scene and dumped his possessions in a nearby field. Johnson had brain surgery to remove a tumor in 2008. He experienced epileptic convulsions as a result of the surgery's partial success, which left some tumor mass and scar tissue behind. Johnson asked to be executed by firing squad because he thought dying by lethal injection would cause him to suffer excruciating seizures. Since Missouri does not permit the use of a firing squad, the proposal was turned down. After the 2008 surgery, he is thought to have lost up to 20% of his brain tissue. Nonetheless, even before the procedure, his IQ tests varied from 67 to 77, falling within the range of intellectual disability. His final statement was, "I am sorry and have remorse for what I do. I want to say that I love my family and friends. I am thankful of all that my lawyer has done for me. They made me feel love as if I was family to them. I love them all. For all the people that has prayed for me, I thank them from the bottom of my heart. I love the Lord with all my heart and soul. If I am executed, I know where I'm going, to heaven, because I asked him to forgive me." For his final meal, he had 2 double bacon cheeseburgers, onion rings, 2 large strawberry milkshakes, and a large pizza. Willie B. Smith III, executed on October 21st after 30 years on death row in the state of Alabama. Sharma Ruth Johnson, 22, was robbed, dragged into the trunk of her own stolen vehicle, and fatally shot by Smith in 1991. Once Johnson's body was inside the car, according to investigators, Smith set it on fire. His victim was a police officer's sister. Prosecutors claim that Smith carried a shotgun with him when he kidnapped Johnson from an ATM machine in the Birmingham region. Johnson's bank account was drained by him using her card, with just $80 being taken out. For the first time ever, the state let the inmate to have a personal chaplain present during the execution. As the lethal injection operation got underway, Pastor Robert Wiley appeared to pray alongside Smith and placed his hand on his leg. One of his attorneys appeared to be supporting him by raising his fist to the glass in the witness room. Once the initial medicines entered Smith's body, the gurney appeared to jerk twice quickly upward. one of his attorneys referred to the sedative used at the beginning of executions that has been the subject of legal dispute by saying, "That's the midazolam." At first, his respiration was laborious, but then it decreased and eventually ceased. He gave no final words, and he did not choose a final meal. He just snacked on barbecue chips, M&Ms, and had a Coke. John Marion Grant, executed on October 28 after 23 years on death row in the state of Oklahoma. For the 1998 murder of prison cafeteria worker Gay Carter, Grant received a death sentence. At the time of the murder, Grant was a prisoner in the Dick Connor Correctional Facility in Hominy, Oklahoma, serving a 130-year sentence for 4 separate armed robberies. He had already spent around 18 of those years. Grant had previously served time at the same prison when he worked in the prison kitchen and got to know Carter. Grant lost his employment after an altercation with another prisoner. Grant and Carter had a disagreement over Grant's breakfast tray both the morning before the murder and the morning of the murder, which was November 13, 1998. 2 prisoners who worked in the prison dining hall overheard Grant threatening Carter during both of these arguments. The 2 inmates noticed Grant lurking near a storage closet that contained cleaning supplies after the last dispute. Shortly after Carter passed that closet, Grant grabbed her and pulled her inside. Grant used a prison mate's shank to stab Carter in the chest while they were both in the closet. Carter needed assistance from a jail officer, so Grant escaped and made an effort to stab himself in the chest with the shank. Grant was soon overpowered by prison personnel. Medical professionals were working to revive Carter, who had stopped breathing in the meantime. She was found to have 16 stab wounds, one of which perforated her aorta, causing fast blood loss and her death. An internal report stated that Grant was seen hurriedly consuming a considerable quantity of potato chips and soda on October 28, 2021 at 3:15 p.m., just 45 minutes before Grant's scheduled execution. He was escorted to the execution chamber after being taken for a shower by a restraint crew. The execution of Grant started around 4 p.m. There were a variety of eyewitness descriptions of what occurred. Grant allegedly yelled, "Let's go, let's go, let's go," from the back of a curtain. When the curtain was then raised, Grant yelled a stream of profanities. His execution was not pretty. Witnesses concurred that Grant started convulsing and throwing up after receiving the first medication.
He began convulsing about 24 times, full body convulsions, and then began to vomit. 2 members of the medical team or the execution team came in and wiped his face. At that point he was still breathing, and he was declared unconscious at 4:15.
There were 11 witnesses. Mr. Grant had 2 witnesses in front of us. At one point, one of his witnesses started crying.
I've witnessed about 14 executions. I've never witnessed that before.
The autopsy showed that he had drowned and suffocated, suffering a flash pulmonary edema. David Neal Cox, executed on November 17th after 11 years on death row in the state of Mississippi. He was convicted for the murder of his estranged wife in May 2010. According to court records, the Coxes divorced in 2009 after Kim Cox's daughter, who was still a child, claimed David Cox had essayed her. He was detained as a result of Kim Cox's police report about the incident. Cox bought a handgun and 2 extra magazines on May 14, 2010. He visited Kim Cox and her 3 children, 2 of which were his own, who were residing at the house of his sister-in-law. According to court records, he fired his way into the house. One of his children and his sister-in-law managed to flee and make an emergency call. For more than 8 hours, David Cox held the other people hostage. He shot Kim and then he essayed his stepdaughter 3 times in front of his dying wife. He decided to waive his appeals at some point. Right before his execution, he said he was remorseful of what he did. This is what he wrote in the letter to the local district attorney when he asked for the court to set a date for his execution. You decide if he was sorry or not. If I had my perfect way and will about it, I'd ever so gladly dig my dead sarcastic wife up, whom I very happily and premeditatedly slaughtered on May 21st, 2010, and with eager pleasure kill, again and again, happily if chance was given. His last words were, I want my children to know that I love them very much and I was a good man at one time. And don't ever read anything but the King James Bible. And I want to thank the commissioner for being so kind to me. And that's all I gotta say. For his last meal, he had banana pudding, French fries, fried catfish, and cornmeal. Bigler Job Stauffer II, executed on December 9th after 37 years on death row in the state of Oklahoma. He was convicted of murdering schoolteacher Linda Reeves in 1985. He also shot her boyfriend Doug Ivans in the face, but he survived and testified at the trial. Stauffer was at that time dating Ivans' ex-wife, and the prosecution argued he tried to murder Ivans to get access to his life insurance money. Stauffer claimed until the end that he was innocent and Linda Reeves was already dead when he got to the house, and then Ivans turned the gun on him, so he shot the man in self-defense. His final words were, "My request is that my father forgive them. Thank you." He did not get a last meal because he missed the deadline in which he had to list his preference. In an interview before the execution, Stauffer said, "They asked me what I wanted for a last meal. I had no idea at that time what I wanted for a last meal. They said, if you don't list it, you don't get it. I said, that's fine with me." Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.